Have you ever noticed a streetlight out on your block and thought nothing of it? You should. It's not a malfunction. It's a vacancy sign for things that hunt in the spaces we forget to look. There are cartographical ghosts in this country. Places that exist in brick and mortar but have been exorcised from the digital record. One of them is a neighborhood in Portland, Oregon called Thornwood Heights. The streets are paved. The houses stand, their windows staring out like vacant eyes. People live there, or at least, things that look like people still draw their curtains at night. But if you were to consult any city map, any satellite image, any GPS database generated in the last few years, you would find only a blank, green wound in the city's grid where Thornwood Heights should be. A digital amputation. The residents first became aware of their own erasure in the summer of 2019. Sarah Kellerman, a woman who had measured her life in property lines and closing costs for 2 decades, was the first to see the void. She'd lived on Mapleton Drive for 16 years, raised 2 children in a tidy colonial, and knew the neighborhood's every crack in the pavement. While showing a listing to a young couple eager to buy their own piece of certainty, her tablet's GPS simply gave up. It didn't freeze. It didn't crash or display an error message. The polite blue that represented her car just slid off the known world and came to a stop in the middle of an unmarked, pixelated forest. When she pinched and zoomed out, her entire life, her home, her neighbors, the school her kids attended, had vanished from the map. It was, she thought, a server error, a software bug, an inconvenience. They all thought that at first. Everyone had a rational explanation. It was easier than confronting the alternative. But then, the streetlights began to go out. It didn't happen all at once. A citywide blackout would have been a communal event, something to be explained and then fixed. This was different. This was a quiet, methodical plucking of light, one lamp at a time, over months. A slow strangulation. The first to die was on the corner of Mapleton and First Street on October 3rd, 2019, just after the 8 o'clock news. A resident named Marcus Webb, a man who took civic duties seriously, reported it to the city. A work order was filed. A crew dispatched within 48 hours. Standard procedure. A blown bulb, faulty wiring, the mundane decay of public infrastructure. When the 2 city technicians arrived, their cherry picker groaning as it lifted them towards the sky, they found something that didn't fit their training manuals. The light fixture, a heavy-duty Cobra head model, was empty. The bulb wasn't shattered. The filament wasn't burned out. It was gone, simply removed. But the reinforced glass cover was still locked. The tamper-proof seal was intact, its metal band unscarred. There were no scuffs on the pole, no footprints in the soft earth below. It was an impossible, sterile extraction. According to their logs, the bulb was less than a year old, rated for another 5 years of faithful service. Puzzled, they chalked it up to a manufacturing defect, a strange atmospheric event, anything but the truth. They installed a new bulb, sealed the fixture, and drove away. The new light lasted 3 nights. Then it, too, disappeared. Within 6 weeks, the quiet plague spread. 11 more streetlights in Thornwood Heights went dark. Each time, a new work order. Each time, a city crew. And each time, the same baffling discovery. An empty fixture, perfectly sealed, the bulb abducted from its socket. By January of 2020, the city's patience had worn thin. The world was beginning to cough, to shutter its windows against a new, biological fear. A global pandemic was a tangible crisis. Missing streetlight bulbs in a quiet suburb were not. The calls from Thornwood Heights went unanswered. The work orders were marked unresolved. And so, the residents were abandoned to the encroaching dark. That's when the walking began. Jennifer Park was the first to keep a record. An insomniac and freelance graphic designer, she treated the hours between midnight and dawn as her most productive. Her house on a lonely cul-de-sac at the neighborhood's eastern edge, became her observatory. In a series of increasingly frantic emails to a private investigator, she described what the darkness had brought with it. At first, she dismissed them as neighbors. Fellow insomniacs, perhaps. People walking off the day's anxieties. But these figures didn't adhere to the logic of a late-night stroll. They ignored the sidewalks, the neat property lines. They moved through backyards, flowed like water between houses, always keeping to the deepest pools of shadow where the streetlights had been stolen. Their pace was slow, unnervingly deliberate, a funereal procession with no destination. They looked, she wrote, like they were searching for something they had dropped. Jennifer could never discern any features. The darkness was too absolute, a thick, light-devouring velvet. But she saw patterns. They materialized only between 2 and 4 in the morning, the hours when the world is at its most fragile. They made no sound, no crunch of leaves, no scuff of a shoe. And they always, without exception, moved in groups of 3. She risked mentioning it to her neighbor, David Restrepo, a stoic man who worked in logistics. To her surprise, he didn't laugh. He admitted, in a hushed tone, that he and his wife had seen them too. They'd convinced themselves it was a shared delusion, a symptom of the pandemic's suffocating stress and the sudden, forced isolation. But it wasn't paranoia. On the night of March 27, 2020, a retired police officer named Thomas Greer decided he'd had enough of living in fear. Decades on the force had taught him that most monsters were just men, and men could be confronted. He retrieved a high-powered, military-grade flashlight from his garage and a small digital camera. At 2:15 in the morning, while his wife Patricia watched from the upstairs bedroom window, he stepped outside. Patricia later recounted the events to investigators, her voice a tremor. She saw Thomas walk to the edge of their driveway, a solid, defiant shape against the gloom. He stopped where their property met the street, just at the precipice of the abyss created by the dead streetlights. He raised the flashlight. He turned it on. A brilliant, white sphere of light cut through the night, pinning something in its beam. From her high vantage point, Patricia couldn't see what it was. But she saw her husband, a man she had known for 40 years, a man who had faced down armed criminals without flinching, freeze. He stood utterly, preternaturally still for what felt like an eternity, but was likely less than a minute. The flashlight beam didn't waver. It was locked onto something just beyond her line of sight. Then he switched it off. The world plunged back into absolute black. He just stood there, a silhouette against an even darker background, for another 30 seconds. Then he turned, walked back into the house, locked the door, and went to bed without speaking a single word. The next morning was tense. Patricia asked him what he had seen. He stared into his coffee cup and said he didn't want to talk about it. She pressed, her fear making her insistent. His reaction was alien. He became agitated, his voice sharp, demanding she drop it. This was not the Thomas she knew. Over the next week, the man she loved began to unravel. Sleep became his enemy. He would spend his nights in the living room recliner, every lamp in the house blazing, his eyes fixed on the front door, as if expecting a siege. He refused to step outside after sundown. When Patricia pleaded with him, asked him what was so terrible that he couldn't share it with her, he finally broke. He looked at her, his eyes wide with a terror she had never seen before, and whispered one sentence. "They're not people." On April 4th, 2020, at 3 o'clock in the morning, Thomas Greer left the house. Patricia woke to the cold emptiness of their bed. A frantic search of the house, then a tearful call to the police. They found him at dawn. He was standing in the exact center of the intersection of Mapleton and First Street, the very spot where the first streetlight had been extinguished 6 months before. He was perfectly still, his head tilted slightly upward, his eyes open and unseeing. He was unresponsive to voices, to touch, to the wail of the ambulance siren. Paramedics transported him to Emmanuel Hospital, where he was admitted. The diagnosis was a profound catatonic state. Doctors were baffled. Every neurological test, every brain scan came back normal. Physically, Thomas Greer was a healthy 64-year-old man, but his mind had been scooped out. He hasn't spoken a word since that night. He just stares, unblinking, into a space no one else can see. The only stimulus that elicits any response is darkness. If a nurse accidentally turns off the lights in his room, he begins to scream. A raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated terror that doesn't stop until the light is restored. Officially, the city of Portland has no record of any Thornwood Heights incidents. Officials, when pressed by the rare, inquisitive journalist, deflect with practiced ease. They speak of routine maintenance, budget constraints, isolated acts of vandalism. Nothing to see here. But the paper trail, if you know where to look, tells a different story. Leaked internal emails between city engineers express confusion and frustration. Work orders are stamped discontinued, do not engage. And then there is the memo, dated May 2020, from a high-level manager at the Portland Bureau of Transportation. It directs all city crews, in no uncertain terms, to suspend any and all service calls to addresses within the Thornwood Heights postal code. Until further notice. No reason. No explanation. Just a quarantine. A directive to let the darkness win. Throughout that summer, more lights went dark. By August, the neighborhood was a checkerboard of light and absolute black. The social fabric frayed, then tore. Residents scurried from their cars to their front doors, heads down, flashlights cutting nervous, trembling arcs in the gloom. The figures were seen more often now, their presence more brazen. Dozens of residents reported them. Frantic attempts to capture them on camera yielded nothing but disappointment. The photos showed only an oppressive, grainy darkness, sometimes with a smudge or a shape that a hopeful mind could interpret as a human form, but nothing definitive. It was like trying to photograph a hole. In August, Elise Tran packed her bags. She'd lived in Thornwood Heights for 12 years, but the constant, low-grade terror had eroded her sanity. It wasn't just the figures. It was the change in her neighbors. The silence. People no longer greeted each other. Eyes were always averted. The entire community moved with the furtive, hunted energy of prey. Elise fled to a high-rise apartment in downtown Portland, 20 minutes and a world away. She told her friends she finally felt safe, 9 floors up, surrounded by the reassuring hum of the city. 3 weeks later, her newfound safety shattered. She called a friend, her voice thin with panic. The streetlight directly outside her apartment window, the one that had cast a comforting orange glow on her bedroom wall, was out. Paranoia, she told herself. Coincidence. But then the lamp at the end of the block went dark. And the one across the street. The pattern was repeating. The darkness had followed her. It was spreading. By the fall of 2020, the infection was no longer contained to Thornwood Heights. Reports trickled in from other neighborhoods, disparate and disconnected. Northeast Alberta, Southeast Division, Northwest Thurman. The stories were all the same. Streetlights dying. Maintenance crews finding impossibly empty, sealed fixtures. And hushed whispers of silent, slow-moving figures in the dark. The darkness was expanding outward from Thornwood Heights, a silent, concentric plague. City officials continued their campaign of denial. Each incident was an island, they insisted. Equipment failure. Vandalism. Nothing was connected. But the residents, the ones living in the spreading shadows, knew better. They found each other in the digital light of online forums and subreddits. Anonymous communities of the afraid, sharing stories, photos, and theories. Was it a secret government experiment? A new form of industrial pollutant? Or was it something older? Something that had been waiting for the lights to go out. In December of 2020, 3 graduate students from Portland State University's psychology department launched an unsanctioned study. They were young, ambitious, and didn't believe in monsters, only in patterns of mass hysteria. They interviewed dozens of residents, collected testimonies, and meticulously mapped the spread of the dead zones. Their official findings were never published. The university, when asked, claims no such study ever took place. But one of the researchers, a woman named Amanda Chen, kept a private journal. Her notes were discovered in her apartment after she vanished. In her journal, Amanda described a chilling pattern. The darkness wasn't spreading randomly. It was methodical. It followed the city's arteries, power lines, underground conduits. But there was another, more disturbing correlation. It seemed to target places where human connection was already weak. Neighborhoods with high turnover rates, low community engagement, places where people lived inches apart but miles away from each other. Places where isolation was the norm. The darkness, she theorized, wasn't causing the isolation. It was consuming it. It was a predator that fed on loneliness. Her final entry, dated January 7th, 2021, contained only 3 sentences. I saw them tonight. From my window. I know what they want. They want us to forget each other. Amanda Chen was last seen on security footage on January 9th, 2021. The camera in her building's hallway shows her leaving her apartment at 2:43 a.m. She walks towards the stairwell. She never emerges from it. She is not seen on any exterior cameras. She did not leave through the lobby or the parking garage. She simply ceased to exist somewhere in the concrete shaft between the 8th floor and the ground. As of today, over 40 neighborhoods in Portland are classified as chronic lighting failure zones. The city has unofficially ceded these territories. Private security patrols are sometimes hired, but they never last. The guards quit, complaining of a crushing sense of being watched, of being followed by unseen things just at the edge of their vision. The figures are still seen. They are no longer confined to groups of 3. Sometimes witnesses report seeing dozens of them, standing shoulder to shoulder in the dark spaces between homes, silent and still as statues. Those who have been foolish or unlucky enough to make eye contact report a powerful, seductive urge to simply walk out their front door and join them. An invitation to step into the darkness and forget. Forget their jobs. Forget their families. Forget they ever had a name. There's a theory, a piece of digital folklore whispered on the forums. It suggests the darkness isn't an absence of light, but a presence. A sentient form of isolation. An entity that gestates in the cracks of a crumbling society, in the spaces created when we stop looking at and for each other. In those places where we are no longer seen by our fellow humans, something else begins to see us instead. The city, for the most part, carries on. People are busy. They notice the broken streetlights, but they're someone else's problem. They might catch a glimpse of a strange shape in their peripheral vision at night, but they dismiss it. A trick of the light. A homeless person. They don't realize they are participating in their own erasure. They are already forgetting. Thomas Greer is still in Emmanuel Hospital, a living ghost. But the staff have noticed a strange phenomenon. During citywide power outages, when the entire hospital is plunged into emergency generator darkness, Thomas wakes up. He becomes lucid. He can state his name, his wife's name, the day of the week. He is, for those brief moments, whole. But the moment the main power grid is restored and the fluorescent lights flicker back to life, he recedes. The light pushes him back into a silent prison. During one such outage in March of last year, a brave night nurse knelt by his bed and asked him the question that had haunted everyone. Thomas, what did you see that night? What was in the flashlight beam? He turned his head and looked at her, his eyes filled with a terrible, ancient clarity. I saw that the darkness isn't empty, he said, his voice raspy from disuse. We are. And they're trying to fill us. The lights buzzed back on before he could say more. He hasn't spoken since. Thornwood Heights still stands. People still live within its boundaries. But if you go there, if you ask them about the darkness, about the figures, they will offer you only blank stares. They have no memory of such things. Everything, they will insist, has always been fine. It's impossible to know if they have truly forgotten or if they have simply made the choice not to remember. Because to remember is to acknowledge that we are being harvested, one lonely soul at a time. To remember is to admit that the things in the dark don't need to hide because we have already learned to look away from each other. The lights are going out all over the country. Seattle, San Francisco, Phoenix, small towns you've never heard of. You just haven't noticed the pattern yet, but you will. One night, you'll be standing at your own window, staring out at your own quiet street, and you will see them. A group of 3, then more, moving with that slow, searching deliberation through your neighbor's yard. And in that moment, you will face the same choice as Thomas Greer: to turn on a light, to confront what they are, or to step back from the window, close the blinds, and forget you ever saw anything. To let the darkness fill the empty spaces. Most people, you see, choose to forget. That's what it's counting on.